Interesting to hear Elon Musk at the beginning talk about a zero tariff.
Oh, we already saw this. We haven't watched. Bessent was on NBC. Full interview.
And joining me now is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Secretary,
has he tweeted or made any statements about the rumors of him leaving? Or are we just assuming that wasn't true? Or assuming it might be true if he hasn't made any statements about it. Conservatives, small government, privatize everything, trickle down, welfare makes people lazy, etc., are like Marxists claiming that their ideology is never at fault and just hasn't been done the real way yet. True. Who was that? I don't know, a lawyer dude who is in charge of there's like a weekly news thing that's posted summarizing a bunch of news with a few writers on my subreddit. We're getting rolling more and more. Called the Pragmatic Papers. Here you go. There was an interview with Pam Bondi as well. Oh boy.
Bessent, welcome back to Meet the... And joining me now is Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Secretary Bessent, welcome back to Meet the Press.
It's good to see you.
It's great to have you back after a very big week. Let's start with the market reaction to President Trump's announcement of his tariffs. As I just laid out at the top of the program, the markets lost more than $6 trillion in value. Was this disruption...
Hey.
What's up?
Sorry to bug you. Real quick. People in your chat, I don't know if they're goofing on me, but they said I can have like a lawyer flair in DGG chat. Is that a thing?
Yeah, message me and I'll get you one eventually. It has to be verified.
I did message you. I'll message you again about it.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Bye.
Thanks.
Always part of the plan, Mr. Secretary?
Look, Chris, markets are organic, the animals, and you never know what the reaction's going to be.
I feel like I'm just repeating the same talking points, and I am. I love how fluid and organic and unreliable markets are when Donald Trump is destroying them. But when markets are going up, my God, they're the best indicator of how the economy feels about a given thing ever. So good.
One thing that I can tell you as the Treasury Secretary, what I've been very impressed with is the market infrastructure, that we had record volume on Friday. And
like, what did somebody call this? Did somebody call this NFL stats or football stats or something? Remember when I said, like, people will pick, like, in the last 2 months, this sector, blah, blah, blah. Look at the market volume? We're talking about the volume of trades now? What?
Is the market infrastructure, that we had record volume on Friday, and everything is working very smoothly, so the American people...
people have been able to sell off their shit with ease. What an insane statement to make.
Be very... take great comfort in that. And in terms of the market reaction, look, we get these short-term market reactions from time to time. The market consistently... underestimates Donald Trump. I remember that in 2016, the night President Trump won, the market crashed. And it turned out he was going to be the most pro-business.
How much did it, quote unquote, crash? And how long did that crash last for? Wasn't this like a point or two dip and then it came back like a day later?
President in over a century, maybe in the history of the country, and we went on to very high after inflation returns for the next 4 years.
Well, but this was the biggest two-day crash since the pandemic. The president on Saturday urging people, quote, to hang tough, saying it won't be easy. And I guess the big question on people's minds, Mr. Secretary, how difficult is it going to be? And how long are Americans going to have to hang tough?
Well, again,
you guys are okay.
Reject that the assumption.
What are we rejecting?
There doesn't have to be a recession. Who knows how the market is going to react in a day, in a week.
Well, I mean, we all kind of know it's not that hard here. You're just trying to literally kamikaze the entire economy. So I think anybody can predict pretty easily here what's going on.
You're looking at is building the long-term economic fundamentals for prosperity that I think the previous administration had put us on a course toward financial calamity.
Oh,
but
really?
Just in terms of the...
I also like, too, that we're not saving everybody from the horrible Biden economy. we're saving everybody from where the Biden economy was supposedly going to. Like, I like that. Like, it's not like we had to come out and bail us from horrible. It was like, it's not like, yeah, like the economy was horrible. We had to bail you out. It was, we knew it was going to go to a bad place. So we're trying to do better than the place that the economy was headed for. Like, okay, that's certainly an argument.
Certainty, I think, that people are feeling and seeing. And President Trump saying he wants people to hang tough, acknowledging there's going to be what he has described as a short period of pain. Can you help provide some clarity for folks? How long will this period of uncertainty be? Are we talking about weeks? Are we talking about months? Are we talking about years?
You know, I have no idea. I have no fucking idea.
This is an
I have no
adjustment
fucking idea.
process.
I have no fucking idea.
We saw with President Reagan when he
What he means when he says it is, I have no fucking idea, and I don't know, or it's going to be long.
brought down the great inflation, and we got past the Carter malaise, that there was some choppiness at that
some
time.
Choppiness.
But he held the course, and we're going to hold the course. And this has been years in the building, years in the making. This unsustainable.
Well, not too many years, only 4 years in the making, right? Because remember, Trump was president before Biden, right? So that wouldn't make sense if we said it was too many years in the making, right?
System. Our trading partners have taken advantage of us. We can see that through the large surpluses. We can see this through the large budget deficits. And also, Kristen, this is a national security problem, which we saw during COVID. We saw during COVID that optimal supply chains are not resilient. And what I could say is the only good outcome from COVID is it was a beta test for what would happen if our supply chains got broken. And President Trump has decided that we cannot be at risk like that for our crucial medicines, for semiconductors, for shipping, and we are going to move forward so the American people can know that they are going to have a more secure future.
And yet, President Trump promised that he was going to improve the economy starting on day one. He said prices are going to come down. More than 160 million Americans, Mr. Secretary, as you know, are invested.
Well, Jane, Dan, thanks for the 5 good memberships.
In the market, many of them have spent their lives saving for their retirement. What is your message to Americans who want to retire right now and who've just seen their lifetime savings?
Keep working, you losers.
Kristen, I think that's a false narrative. Americans who want to retire right now
are losers.
Americans who have put away for years in their savings accounts.
Oh, what? Did he just say that? Maybe he. Hold on, I'm so sorry. What? Americans who. Why didn't he just say cash under the mattress? He should have just said Americans that have been hoarding cash underneath their blankets they're going to be fine, I think.
Significantly.
Well, Kristen, I think that's a false narrative. Americans who want to retire right now, the Americans who have put away for years in their savings accounts, I think they don't look at the day-to-day fluctuations of what's happening. And, in fact, most Americans don't have everything in the market. Most Americans in a 401k have what's called a 60-40 account. That 60 of 40 accounts they are down 5 or 6% on the year. People have a long-term view. They have a program.
You don't really have that much of a long-term view, depending on, like, the long-term view is preparing for retirement. Once you're retired, hopefully you've moved out of any kind of, or a lot of the volatility, but.
The reason the stock market is considered a good investment is because it's a long-term investment. If you look day to day, week to week, it's very.
Why does your YouTube video have so many dislikes? I have no idea. Apparently somebody's been dislike bombing my stream, but I don't even know what that does. I don't know if the dislike shit matters. So
very risky. Over the long term, it's a good investment.
President Trump's tariffs are being described as the biggest tax hike on Americans in decades. They could cost the average household thousands of dollars. Republican Senator Ted Cruz had this to say. I'm going to play it. Get your reaction on the other side.
Teddy.
Tariffs are a tax on consumers, and I'm not a fan of jacking up taxes on American consumers.
Do you acknowledge that President Trump's tariffs will cause prices to go up on a range of goods?
Well, hold on. The important thing is to understand how much I can pivot away from ever answering that question and talk about the long-term stuff that we're building. We've got to take back what we were going towards a depression with where Biden was taking us. And the important thing is to
Kristen, what I like is data. And if we look at data from President Trump's first term, and there's a big study that just came out from a group of economists, mostly at MIT, that showed that a 20% tariff on China led to a 0.7% tax or price level increase over.
A study just came out that from the first tariff that we did, just looking at the one on China in Trump's first term, that was 10 or 20%, led to a point. It's like bro, you're killing us.
For 4 years. I think that's pretty good. If we can take in.
No one is talking about a specific market sector or country specific tariff. Bro, you guys have slapped these on the entire world. Also, I like how he almost said tax. Yeah, true.
On China led to a 0.7% tax or price level increase over 4 years. I think that's pretty good. If we can take in 20% in tariffs, and it's a 0.7% increase. And Kristen, the little publicized story this week.
Price increase across what? Our entire economy? Is that good? So it's just a tax then. So just say you guys wanted to tax us more.
Everyone wants to look at the stock market going down. You know what else went down? Oil prices went down.
Yeah, because of a lack of demand, because people are now planning on a recession coming.
15% in 2 days, which impacts
Do you think that's the fact that they're like citing this as a good thing? Like, do you know when else energy costs are going to be low? In the fucking apocalypse, when no one has a fucking generator to run any fucking fossil fuels anymore. Like, Jesus Christ.
Americans much more than the stock market does. You know what else went down? Oil prices went down almost 15% in 2 days, which impacts working Americans much more than the stock market does. Interest rates hit their low for the year, so I'm expecting the mortgage applications to pick up.
Well, just to be very clear, though, I mean, during President Trump's first terms, the cost to Americans was nearly $80 billion in new taxes due to his tariffs. Prices did go up on everything from washing machines to tires.
Well, no. But let's go back. The aggregate number was 0.7, so we can discern.
Yeah, let's talk about the aggregate number here. Like an aggregate number of all prices across the entire economy is going to be exactly what the average American will pay, because of course our expenditures are aggregated across the entire economy. I don't know about you, but I would say in a typical day, I think I probably spend, I would say probably $12 on asphalt, $47 on textiles, $16 on agriculture, $12, like, yeah, you know, most Americans have, I don't even know why we use like the CPI and all that bullshit. We should just look at the aggregate price across every single sector across the entire economy. That sounds like so much better.
In individual things. Also, households saw real net wages go up. So
real means net, doesn't it? But whatever.
If wages go up faster than prices, which is not what happened over the past 4 years.
Real wages go up faster than prices. That's what a real wage is. It's baked into the definition. A real wage is including the prices. That's why it's real and not nominal. But okay.
That's why the bottom 50% got eviscerated.
Well, let me ask you about your view, because last January you wrote that, quote, tariffs are inflationary. The Fed chair said the same thing on Friday, that tariffs announced this week cause higher inflation. Have you expressed any concerns to President Trump directly that his tariff policy could be inflationary?
No, what I've said is tariffs are a one-time price adjustment. So
dude, how is this not 1984 in real life? This is the most 1984 shit ever. Like the different words, the different definitions of things. Like, isn't this going to be an inflationary thing? Excuse me. We call them price adjustments now, okay? A price adjustment, an upward price adjustment, okay? Wow, Elective Tool, thanks for 10 gifted memberships.
Tariffs are a one-time price adjustment. So there's
She should ask an adjustment in which direction?
big difference between insipid endemic inflation within.
There is no difference, by the way, because that's what inflation is. It's a price increase cumulatively. Inflation over a period of time or ever leads to an increase in price. Now it happens steadily over time, but a big inflation rate that goes down like afterwards will still have that big price hike baked into it because because inflation is just measure the rate of change of a thing, right? If I say for 1 year I have 100% inflation and then the next year the inflation goes to 1%, I still have all that price increase from the last year. I don't know why I'm correcting this guy. He's just fucking lying, but whatever.
There's a big difference between insipid endemic inflation within the system and consistent price level increases and a one-time adjustment. But the other thing that we're doing is we are raising wages for working Americans. We're bringing down regulation. So there are estimates that regulations have cost the average household about $8,000, that when we get this tax bill through, then we will make the tax levels permanent. And again, the drop in the energy prices, the drop in interest cost, I think real after.
You keep saying drop in interest costs. Has the Fed said they're lowering interest rates, or is this just a pure hopium assumption that the Fed is going to give in and lower interest rates?
Tax wages are going to go up for Americans, and that's what's important.
One of the big questions and points of confusion, I think, is are these tariffs permanent or are they a negotiating tactic? Some administration officials have said they're permanent. President Trump himself has said he's open to negotiating. So let me just ask you, is President Trump willing to negotiate, or are these tariffs permanent?
Well, I think that's going to be a decision for President Trump, but I can tell you that as only he can do at this moment, he's created maximum leverage for himself. And more than 50 countries have approached the administration about lowering their non-tariff trade barriers, lowering their tariffs.
Like, this doesn't make any sense. Again, even within their own system, these are contradictory. How are you trying to tell manufacturers to build in America with the most oppressive tariffs levied in human history by a major power, but then simultaneously saying 50 countries have approached us for conversations about what tariffs could look like? Like, there's no certainty. This is the most uncertain environment ever.
Stopping currency manipulation, and they've been bad actors for a long time, and it's not the kind of thing you can negotiate away in days or weeks.
You yourself have said that he's using these for negotiating. He has told me directly he's open to negotiating. So just very clearly, for the American people, can you say definitively, is he planning to negotiate? Has he already started negotiations with countries?
I think we're going to have to see what the countries offer and whether it's believable. Because again,
so he's open to it, is what I hear you saying.
No. I think that we are going to have to see the path forward, because after 20, 30, 40, 50 years of bad behavior, you can't just wipe the slate clean.
All right, let me ask you about one of the big questions. Recession, as you know, analysts say the chances of a recession are rising in the wake of the tariffs announced this week.
Haters.
Do you believe that President Trump's tariffs are risking the chances of a recession?
I don't, and I think we could see from the jobs number on Friday that was
they are. Oh my God, they are hugging that jobs number so much. What was it, like 10,000 new jobs? They're fucking wrapping themselves with that job number. By the way, that had nothing to do with the tariffs, and she's probably about to point out that was a retrospective thing.
Above expectations that we are moving forward. So I see no reason that we have to price in a recession.
Okay. Before I let you go, I know you've been one of the officials spearheading the efforts to get President Trump's budget bill passed on Capitol Hill. It includes the president's plans for tax cuts, extending the 2017 tax cuts, for example. Are you confident that the president's budget bill will pass before the August recess?
We are shooting for even a much earlier date. And Chris and I can tell you the underreported story in D.C. is, it's fun from our side of the aisle to watch the Democratic chaos, but the underreported story is the Republican unity. And Speaker Johnson has done an incredible job with a small minority. He got reconciliation instructions out on the first try. He got a clean continuing resolution. Speaker Thune, the Senate issued the reconciliation instructions, so things are moving very quickly.
Very quickly, President Trump called on the Fed chair to lower interest rates. Do you think that Fed Chair Jerome Powell should lower interest rates?
I think that when we see inflation dropping, that the Fed will do what it always does and lower rates. But in the meantime, what we can control is the longer-term rate, the 10-year rate, which hit a new low on Friday. That's where mortgages are priced. That's where long-term capital formation is priced. And, back to the tax deal, when we can pass that, we will have economic certainty.
Okay, we'll be watching for that timeline you just laid out very closely. Secretary Scott Bessent, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Jesus
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
I know that this may be some. Today, of course, you saw what happened in the markets. The Dow dropped more than 2,000 points today. Not a typo. Dow plunges 2,200 points. Yesterday and today are the first time ever that the Dow has dropped 1,500 points or more on 2 consecutive days.
And
1,600 points yesterday, 2,200 points today.
So?
The S&P 500 dropped 10% in 2 days. It dropped 6% today alone. Just for context, whether or not you watch the markets, whether or not you have any money in the markets or a retirement account or whatever, just to get a sense of the scale here, I'll give you 2 metrics here to get a sense of the scale. The first one is the circuit breakers. Do you know about this? The markets have circuit breakers that kick in when things go off a cliff. That's a mixed metaphor, but I think you know what I mean. They call them trading curbs, and they're these shutoffs that kick in automatically and basically stop the market. They stop people from trading for 15 minutes when things have gone unbelievably wrong. And where those circuit breakers kick in, like the threshold of how bad it has to be before the circuit breakers kick in, is when the S&P drops 7% from the previous day's close. Today, the S&P dropped 6%. Had we got to 7, we would have hit the circuit breaker. They would have turned the lights out on the market to try to save us from ourselves. That's one way to understand the severity of what's happened here. And here's another. Look at this. This is the VIX index, VIX. Unlike the stock market graphs where you can tell things are bad when they go down, with the VIX, it's the volatility index. It goes up when things are terrible. It's like the economic crisis meter. And you can see there are just a few big peaks there over time. The first huge peak, that's 2008. That was the global financial disaster of 2008, the worst financial catastrophe since the Great Depression. That's the first big peak. The next big peak is March 2020. That's the equally huge global disaster, right? When the COVID pandemic overran the world, killed millions of people, and basically shut off economic activity like there had been a power outage. So those are the first 2 big peaks there. But now look, new peak. That's now. That's now. That one not caused by the biggest financial catastrophe since the Great Depression or a global pandemic that's killing millions of people. That one caused simply by Donald Trump being president. Again, with his great ideas. And the scale of what he's doing, the scale of the destruction that he has wrought, is a little bit hard to get your head around. I mean, like, you can see the headline writers scrambling to try to find the right words tonight. I mean, here's the Wall Street Journal front page right now. U.S. stocks plunge deeper, capping worst week since 2020, which again was the pandemic. Trump's tariffs set off 2-day sell-off as recessionary fears mount. More than $6 trillion erased from market. This has been the lead analysis piece on CNBC.com all day. Trump's tariffs are biggest policy mistake in 95 years. This is the lead editorial today at the Financial Times. America's astonishing act of self-harm. Thought the picture of Trump there actually kind of puts a nice punctuation mark on that. Look what we've done to ourselves. Hi. But this is the lead, quote, if it endures Donald Trump's decision on April 2nd, 2025, to enact sweeping tariffs on U.S. trade partners, will go down as one of the greatest acts of self-harm in American economic history. His actions will wreak untold damage on households, businesses, and financial markets across the world, upending a global economic order that America benefited from and helped to create. Elsewhere in the FT today, they described Trump's actions as, quote, strangely self-sabotaging, quote, economic lunacy that might seem better explained by psychologists than economists.
Haters.
Larry Summers, former Treasury Secretary, says, quote, this is to economics what creationism is to biology, what astrology is to astronomy, what RFK thought is to vaccine science. The Wall Street Journal summarizes tonight, quote, the Dow Jones Industrial Average became the last of the three major financial indices to enter a correction, defined as a decline of 10% or more from a closing peak. After today, the Dow is down 14.9% from its most recent high. The Nasdaq is now a bear market, off 22.7% from its recent high. Anything more than 20% is considered a bear market. The Magnificent Seven stocks, which include Nvidia, Apple, and Amazon, collectively lost $1.55 trillion in market capitalization this week. That is a record. Apple alone saw $443.5 billion in market value evaporate.
It's coming back.
I mean, it is hard to get your head around how much damage this one man can cause. I think it's even harder to get your head around simultaneously the fact that he can do damage of this magnitude with such a teeny tiny amount of thought. Right? You think it would take like a grand plan and some big brains to figure out how to destroy the economy of the richest nation on earth. But that's not how it's working out. Turns out it doesn't take a big idea or a lot of big brains working together. I know that this may be something that you remember, but just in case it's not, I'm just going to put this back on the front page here just for a second. Because do you remember where Trump got the tariff thing from in the first place? Do you remember like when and why and how we started talking about tariffs in the first place? It was in his first campaign for president. Trump didn't really have any formal economic advisors. So he told his son-in-law, Jared, to find him an economic advisor. Trump reportedly gave Jared some vague ideas of what his thoughts were on economic issues. You know, something, make me look tough, China bad, something. Jared then decided to find his father-in-law a financial advisor for his presidential campaign by going on the Amazon.com website and starting to browse books. Not like reading the books, because you can't do that on the Amazon website. He was just looking at the covers, looking at the titles. And he found a book title that he thought was so cool. The title was Death by China. Oh my God, that's so cool. That's so awesome. And that apparently was it. Quote from Vanity Fair. Trump gave Jared a summary of his views and then asked him to do some research. Kushner simply went on Amazon, where he was struck by the title of one book, Death by China, co-authored by a man named Peter Navarro. Jared then cold called Navarro, a well-known trade deficit hawk who agreed to join the team as an economic advisor. Navarro was a major advocate for an aggressive pro-tariff policy. Where did Peter Navarro get his idea that tariffs would be a good policy for America? What was his backup for that conviction? Well, he did have backup from a real expert who he cited in at least a half dozen of his books, including the one that Jared found on Amazon that fateful day. In all of his books, Peter Navarro has cited an economics expert to justify his views. And the economics expert he cites is somebody named Ron Vera, V-A-R-A, Ron Vera. When Trump won the presidency and entered the White House, this Ron Vera started circulating a memo around Washington in support of Trump using tariffs in trade policy. According to the New York Times, the memo had been, quote, sent from an email address purportedly belonging to Ron Vera. At one point, Ron Vera wrote in the memo that Trump could, quote, ride the tariffs to victory. The problem is Ron Vera doesn't exist. He never has. The economics expert that Peter Navarro has long cited to explain why he's so gung-ho on tariffs, this person, Ron Vera, is a made-up person. He is a fictional person.
What?
Peter Navarro invented Ron Vera as his expert source so he could quote this expert source over and over and over again in his crackpot books. Who is Ron Vera? Ron Vera is an anagram of Navarro, which is his last name.
No shot. This can't be real, right?
My name anagrams to Macho Waddler, but I don't see myself trying to talk you into doing what Macho Waddler wants, right? But that really is how the Trump administration crafted its tariff policy. That's where Trump came up with the tariff idea. Circulating a fake memo from a fake person with a fake email address in order to make it look like this was a serious issue being debated by real experts. That is the intellectual basis on which Donald Trump today wiped $6 trillion of wealth out of existence and crashed America's markets and brought America and the world to the brink of a self-inflicted, on-purpose, global Great Depression along the lines of what we had in 2008 and what the pandemic inflicted upon us in 2020. This time, the global disaster is Donald Trump's big brain.
Based.
And Donald Trump may think it's all going to work out. The American people are awake and well aware that this is not going to work out. New Reuters Ipsos polling, to which I would like to bring your attention. Do you approve or disapprove of Donald Trump's handling of his job as president? Disapprove by a 10-point margin. Do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the economy specifically? Disapprove by a 15-point margin. Do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the issue of international trade? Disapprove by an 18-point margin. Do you approve or disapprove of how Donald Trump is handling the issue of your cost of living? Disapprove by a 27-point margin. Is the Trump administration competent or incompetent at running the federal government? Incompetent by a 20-point margin. Is the Trump administration competent or incompetent at rolling out new economic policies? Incompetent by a 25-point margin. Is the Trump administration competent or incompetent at downsizing government without affecting vital services? Incompetent by a 25-point margin. That's before the markets did what they've done in the last 2 days.
Ooh, I was going to say, when was that poll taken?
The American people get it. They get it. They are awake. They are not giving up.
Are they?
And tomorrow, a lot of them are going to show it.
Jesus. This guy turned into a huge Trump sycophant. Is he actually criticizing Trump now? This guy used to do like psychological profiles of serial killers, and then he turned into a massive fucking Trump dick suck, where he was like analyzing Kamala's speeches and like, clearly Kamala is senile and Trump is brave and confident. Is he like opposed to him now, or?
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I will analyze the tariff-induced stock market side of April 2025. I'll also talk about the panic selling that is occurring right now. First, I'll look at the background of this case, including the timeline of the incident, then offer my analysis. On Wednesday, April 2, 2025, Donald Trump announced sweeping tariffs for goods imported from about 90 countries. There's a universal 10% tax on most imported goods, as well as an additional import tax, which was separately calculated for each of over 50 of the countries affected. Certain goods are not included in these tariffs. For example, steel, aluminum, automobile, and automobile parts have a 25% tariff. Trump justified this move by claiming the trade deficit is unacceptable. In 2024, it was $1.2 trillion. There's an absence of reciprocity in trade relationships. Other nations have been taking advantage of the United States. Again, this is according to Trump. They are cheating the U.S., stealing manufacturing jobs, and manipulating currency. Trump said it was time for a liberation day. His affinity for tariffs is nothing new. Since the 1980s, he has been talking about tariffs as a tool to regulate trade, insisting that other nations are ripping off America. Trump wants foreign nations to manufacture goods in the United States. This way, they will not be subject to a tariff. The tariffs that Trump announced were greater than stock market analysts expected. They're the highest tariffs in the U.S. in about 100 years. Experts predict that prices will increase under these tariffs, and the growth of the U.S. economy will slow. There's a lot of fear about a decrease in corporate earnings. On Thursday and Friday after Trump's tariff announcement, the stock market slid dramatically. All major indexes dropped more than 9% over the 2 days. The S&P 500 lost almost 6% on Friday alone. Stock values dropped by $5 trillion, the largest 2-day loss of shareholder value ever recorded. Again, this is dollar value, not percentage. The largest percentage drop in 2 days happened on October 28 and 29 of 1929. This was the catalyst for the Great Depression. According to JP Morgan, there's now a 60% chance of a recession in 2025 if this trade war continues. Now moving to my analysis. Arguably, Trump has declared a trade war on the entire world. Is this a good idea, or will it lead to disaster? Let's take a look at the factors both for and against the idea that Trump's tariff plan makes sense, starting with the factors that support this theory. The United States is $36 trillion in debt. Whatever the country is doing.
Oh, apparently he's anti-Trump here. Thank you, Dr. Grande. It takes a lot of courage to speak up when your following is so full of Trumpers. Hats off to you, sir. Nice. Okay. Friend of the stream.
As many of you know, I believe that Donald Trump is not only morally perfect, but he's also incapable of making an incorrect decision on anything ever. And on Liberation Day, the Great White Hope announced a large number of tariffs on a number of countries, including China, which is our major trading partner, and the tariff rate is going to be 44%. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that I don't think putting a 44% tariff on China is going to be good for our economy in the foreseeable future. It's particularly bad, for example, for small businesses that rely on China for importing goods.
What? Okay. Hi, I am the founder and CEO.
I got a drink. Hold on.
CEO of a US-based footwear company that has 12 US employees and has created fully convertible high heel technology. Where do you manufacture? Our product is obviously really unique, and so we require specialty injection molding, which is only really available at scale for footwear in China.
Why? Don't you manufacture in the USA?
So we actually don't have scaled footwear manufacturing or really apparel manufacturing of any kind in the US.
Okay, well, I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, that would be really great. We'd be able to manufacture in much faster times and have more direct control over our supply chain, but we physically don't have manufacturers here.
Okay, well, what if I change your import rate from 10% to 99%?
We still wouldn't have US manufacturers here.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do it right now.
Why?
Look, I don't think we should be so reliant on China, so if you're gonna insist on manufacturing in China, I'm gonna charge you 99%.
Okay, to be clear, I'm not insisting on manufacturing in China. It's just the only place I could manufacture.
So, not the USA?
No, not right now. I mean, if you want to like invest in making some manufacturing facilities, it would probably take a couple years and several $1 million. But if you want to do that, I mean, we could talk about it when those are ready.
No, I'm gonna do it right now.
You get the point. Virtually everyone agrees that these tariffs are a bad idea, at least on their face. And that's great, because I know that my audience is made up mostly of mindless sheep who enjoy you having basic facts reaffirmed to them over and over again. However, we're gonna do something dangerous and try and steelman the opposition so we can at least get an idea of why the people doing this are doing this. The underlying philosophy behind these tariffs is called reindustrialization, which basically means bringing manufacturing back home from overseas. People argue this is a bad philosophy because of something called basic economics, which posits that you should embrace trading with people who specialize in certain things so that you can focus on other things. You don't need to manufacture everything you use in your own country. It doesn't make sense to grow your own olives when you can just buy olive oil at the store. And by buying olive oil and going into a trade deficit with the store, you actually create more value for yourself because you can use that olive oil to produce more valuable food. In the same sense, if you try to manufacture steel here instead of buying it more cheaply from China, then everything else is just going to cost more on top of that. This comment left on a YouTube video sums up this sentiment nicely. But here is the fundamental issue, and one I actually quite sympathize with. At a certain point, reducing the material cost of goods does not lead to an improvement in well-being. What's left out of the equation is that having a stable job and having a living wage is a good in and of itself. Even if it's a job that's not economically efficient at creating whatever output, we're talking about, having that job is good because it creates the conditions and the stability needed to produce other social goods, like being able to raise a family. Here's Harvard economist Oren Cass on how free trade does increase GDP per capita, but misses something important.
That, of course, this is going to create a lot of winners and losers. And the argument is typically that the winners can compensate the losers, right? And it's important to say we've actually done that through progressive taxation, through an ever bigger safety net, the people who are struggling, who have lost their jobs and left behind places, they too have more stuff than ever before. What they don't have is a secure job that allows them to support a family. And so this is the first thing GDP per capita misses, is it completely misses where and for who the GDP is happening. Over the last 10 to 20 years, the U.S., the typical working family, has not been well served by that deal, I don't think.
No question. And this is where, so it sometimes gets, people have differing viewpoints and it can get confusing and but here's where I think there can be great agreement. Working people making living wages. And I think that would be very surprising for someone on the center right to sort of agree with maybe the more progressive wing of the Democrats. But that is absolutely a value that we have lost. And do you think that's something that the right will follow you along with? Because it's something I think the left has been screaming about for a very long time.
I think we're moving in that direction. Right. I think it is a process of transition when a party reorients. The term realignment gets used a lot. And then when you look behind that at the sorts of people I work with, the policy wonks, researchers, writers, journalists, lawyers, folks sort of 40 and under are overwhelmingly oriented in this way. Right. And so I have a great deal of hope that as that moves to be the center of the party, you really are going to see a different Republican Party that still loves markets and wants them to work, but has a much better understanding of their limitation, has much more concern for what is happening to the typical working family, and wants to figure out how to keep their conservative principles, but apply them somehow to use public policy and make things better.
So socialism.
Essentially.
Now, nobody loves the left and right coming together to destroy the neoliberal status quo more than I do. However, 44% tariffs on China is probably not going to fix that problem in any meaningful way right now. It's also contradictory because Trump's advisors claims that the revenue that they get from tariffs will be used to fund things like tax cuts for the working class, which is like, okay, in the short term, maybe so. But if companies do reorient supply chains and manufacture stuff back home, then you won't have that tariff revenue anymore. So how are you going to fund things? The meme argument is that this is a negotiating tactic and Trump's going to reduce the tariffs once he gets concessions from the countries that he is imposing them on. And just to be clear, he's proven that that's possible and he's done that before. He got Colombia to concede to accepting deported migrants by threatening a tariff and then removing it. And he got Mexico to do something similar in 2019. He's also completely bullshitted this by claiming, for example, he got concessions from Canada by imposing tariffs on them and then withdrawing them, even though they had already agreed to all of the concessions that he got them to supposedly agree to by using a tariff. But if I had to guess, Trump's advisors said, let's just throw out the largest tariffs we can do by calculating them in this apparently weird way using ChatGPT. Who knows? Wouldn't put it past them, but by putting all of the worst tariffs out, at the beginning, the highest rates, they can shock the market, bottom it out a little bit. And then I'm sure they're going to slowly peel these back as they make deals and announce different things and so on and so forth. If the Trump administration announces some sort of tax credit for small businesses who are affected by the tariffs, that would be an intelligent move. And if it happens, then I'm going to have to go, damn, Trump's actually is playing a little bit 4D chess here. Not really. He's just not as dumb as he often appears and is in many ways. But overall, keeping the tariff as it is unmanageable and unsustainable. Here's a good clip of economist Paul Krugman giving a simple example of the kind of logistical problems that come up with Trump's tariffs.
And
I think we'll probably watch this later today.
Pretty different tariffs. Lower tariff rate that applies to Great Britain. And, it's crazy.
Now, another interesting clip from this conversation with Paul Krugman is where he says that even though tariffs are objectively bad from an economic point of view, there's still justification to do them. I'm just going to...
Okay, he's just giving us like a summary of the news. I don't know why we got like this. All right.
So scale of 1 to 10, how liberated are you feeling right now? I am feeling pretty unliberated. I'm not excited about my freedom.
Okay, it's getting boxier and warmer and the highs are getting cut out more and more, right? Is he trolling us? Am I hallucinating?
Lower prices from a stable stock market, from an economic policy that makes sense. But we had Donald Trump's Liberation Day anyway, where he put forward a huge package of tariffs, bigger than was expected, and also more confusing than was expected.
If you look at Switzerland, 61% to 31%, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, oh, look at Cambodia, Brazil, 10%, Bangladesh is 74%. Very simple, can't get any simpler than that.
When I saw them, it was pretty obvious to me who I wanted to talk to about this. Paul Krugman was a columnist, a colleague of mine here at the New York Times for 25 years. He is a Nobel Prize-winning economist who has specialized in trade over his career, and he's now writing an absolutely excellent Substack under his name. If you've not been reading it, I really suggest that you do. And he's kind enough to come on the show and walk us through his thoughts on one of the most tumultuous days of economic policymaking in American history. Paul Krugman, welcome back to the show.
Hi, good to be on again.
So let's just start with what Donald Trump actually announced on Liberation Day.
Wow. I think most people thought it was going to be some kind of across-the-board tariff, same on everybody, or maybe 2 or 3 different types of tariffs. Instead, he announced this whole complicated, different tariff for every country at levels much higher than the smart money, or the money that thought it was smart, was betting. Something like 23% average tariff now, which is huge. It's higher than U.S. tariffs after Smoot-Hawley was passed. And trade is a much bigger part of the economy now than it was in 1930. So this is the biggest trade shock in history.
How does the tariff country by country seem to have been calculated?
Okay, that was interesting, because on the first thing was, where the heck are they getting these numbers?
It's a podcast. We put the little explicit tag out.
But where is this coming from? And in the Rose Garden speech, Trump said, this is all based on, we've examined the barriers that countries are putting up, and this is our calculation of their tariffs plus other things that count as tariffs. And we're trying to figure out where is that coming from? And it wasn't inherently implausible, right? Who would be doing that careful assessment of other countries' trade policies, country by country? That's a massive undertaking. And it seemed implausible that, basically impossible that they could have done that. And it turned out that they basically took each country's trade balance with the United States, the bilateral trade deficit that we have with them, divided by the amount of their imports. And that, we said, was their de facto tariff rate. And then they cut it in half. So it was this kind of weird calculation, not grounded in any, in anything that back in the days when I used to teach trade courses that I would ever put in, but they came up with this sort of out of the blue calculation method that is country by country, and it's certainly original. I guess you could say that.
The implication of it is that you can understand why you might say a tariff on America is bad. That's locking up the goods that might flow into another country, or services that might flow into another country. But what they're saying is something subtly different, which is that if we have a trade deficit with anybody, that is bad, and it should be treated as evidence of market discrimination, or at least something we want to fix. So this gets, as you like to say, wonkish, but what is a trade deficit? What is a trade balance? And is it a bad thing when we have one with someone else?
Okay, so yeah, we sell, every country has stuff that it sells to other countries, has stuff that it buys from other countries. The trade balance with any particular country is what we buy from them minus what we sell to them. There's no particular reason to think that these numbers should be balanced country by country. All kinds of things can go on. So there's a whole discussion, there's a whole literature in the research on what explains bilateral trade imbalances, but nothing that says that they are ipso facto evidence of foul play, which is what the Trump people seem to believe. U.S. trade policy has been based upon reciprocity. The legal basis for all of these trade agreements that we've had these past 90 years is the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934, which is FDR establishing a system where the United States would negotiate that we will cut our tariffs if other countries cut their tariffs. And for the most part, there are a few exceptions. There are a few countries that actually do have substantially higher tariffs than we do, but other advanced countries actually, like us, have very low tariffs. So it was really kind of strange that was the claimed policy, because that was, if that was the policy, then there was nothing to do because we'd already done it. And then they have this other thing which basically says if you are, running a trade surplus with us, then we're going to take that as evidence of bad behavior anyway. We're going to try and we're going to kick at you if you do that. And that wasn't at all, at least in the selling of this policy, what they said they were going to do.
One of the things flying around in social media.
Okay. Is there going to be anything new in here? I feel like we're running in circles. Is it just the same shit? Market reaction, trade war, contradictory policy, the emperor has no clothes, MAGA's relationship to U.S. power, case for tariffs.
What happens when nobody will tell the king no?
Yeah.
And worse than that, maybe, that when the king begins to favor the people who he knows aren't suppressing the no, right? That there are people in any room who you can kind of tell don't really agree with you and are trying to humor you. And then there's, the intern, the mid-level person who you can tell is really into what you want to do, and maybe you charge them with it. This just doesn't feel to me like a constructed policy. And it's hard because I think that our tools are usually to try to track back the policy rationale, but there are too many policy rationales. None of them actually fit.
Well, we have some direct evidence that that's what's happened. I mean, Peter Navarro, who is sort of Trump's trade czar, I don't know if he's still called that, but effectively, at least according to some of the reporting, he was recruited because they basically set Jared Kushner out to search through Amazon to find somebody who'd written books hostile to China, right? And so they actually looked for people who would tell the king what he wanted to hear. One of the stories I find really interesting, there's this, I'm sure, but listeners probably don't, Bob Lighthizer, who's this long-time contrarian protectionist voice in Washington, and generally regarded as kind of among my friends as a sort of dark satanic force in the trade policy debate, but is respected because he clearly knows his stuff. And people had sort of assumed that he would play a big role in this administration, and he was passed over. And almost for sure, that's because he is independent. He's his own man. He didn't come to this out of fealty to Donald Trump. And so he might actually say to the king, no, not tariffs on Bangladesh. And so this is a kind of courtier-driven catering to, and Donald Trump has been has had this thing about tariffs going back 40 years. So here we are. The idea that there's some master plan or some deeper strategy, it just tortures. It requires torturous ignoring of what's very clearly happening.
Well, one of my broader views about this administration, I keep meaning to write a piece about this, is that you can really tell the story of Trump 1 and Trump 2 by which is the other most powerful member of the family. And in Trump 1, it's Jared Kushner. Yeah. And Kushner brings in very mainstream people. Your Gary Cohn's, as a Goldman Sachs president, your H.R. McMaster's, people who act as inhibitors of the very disinhibited Donald Trump. And in Trump 2, it's not Jared Kushner, it's Don Jr., who's been marinating in the fever swamps of MAGA in the interim years.
What has Don Jr. ever done in life? Like, does this guy have, any accomplishments or anything whatsoever to speak of? Or he's a fucking loser? I have no clue. Like, the Trump Jr. guy, Eric or whatever, seems like a fucking loser.
Who helped bring in people like J.D. Vance, who said the real intention of Trump's second term was we'll vet everybody to make sure there's nobody who's going to stand in his way. Elon Musk and Russ Vought are sort of out there trying to traumatize the federal bureaucracy, destroy any deep state resistance or frankly just any deep state capacity. And so you have people around Trump now who are accelerants, not inhibitors. And this is what you get when you get a bunch of people telling Trump, no, go further. Right? You're right. You've always been right. You were saved from an assassin's bullet by God to make this country great again.
Both of his sons are total. Who's the other one? Kushner, but that's his son-in-law. Kushner seems like a smart dude, even if I think that whole family is insane. But Kushner actually seems like an intelligent guy, actually. I wonder how he feels about all of it. Eric and Don Jr. Which one do we normally see? We normally see Eric Trump, right? Which one is... Oh, no, we normally see Don Jr. Who's Eric Trump? Eric Trump. What does he look like? Where the fuck is Eric Trump at? Did we ever see this guy? All right. I don't know.
Follow your instincts. Don't listen to the markets, the naysayers, the critics, the media. They don't know anything. If we've learned anything, it's that your judgment is right.
Yeah. I mean, there was a moment a day or so ago, I guess, when Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, was asked about how this tariff thing is going to work. And he said, we must trust the president's instincts. And I was like, this is America? We're not supposed to believe in the mysterious, godlike divination powers of the leader. There's an essay by John Maynard Keynes in which he says that economics, although no one will believe it, is a difficult technical subject. And, Trump presumably doesn't understand how feedback from your economic policies can come back and bite you on the rear. And left to himself, he just thinks, I know this, I'm a businessman, and and God backs me. And so you get these, without somebody who can say no to him, and everybody could say no is gone, then he's going to do very strange stuff.
So behind all this, there's been a set of theories that have taken root that are not well expressed in the tariffs, but I think have become increasingly influential in Washington, in the media. You hear talk of this Mar-a-Lago Accord, and they have a lot to do with this idea of the dollar and whether or not having the dollar as a world reserve currency has led to the deindustrialization of America. And so when I hear then people in the Trump administration begin to say, well, what we're doing here is a fundamental realignment of the global financial system. While it may all start with Donald Trump's intuitions, I think it's made a lot of them very ambitious. This idea that maybe they can be part of the next Bretton Woods, that there's something you can do here. Can you talk through, for people who are confused by it, what is the role of the dollar here? How should we understand the relationship between the dollar being the world's reserve currency and America losing some of its manufacturing base, if there is one?
Okay.
Oof. I don't have as much information about this, but one of my understandings is one of the nice things, people freak out about the debt and our budget deficits and all that bullshit, is I think having reserve currency status is one of the things that gives us the ability to fund so much U.S. debt without really having to worry about inflation that much. Now, obviously, there's limits to this. You could print too much. But if we did lose that reserve currency status, we might have to be much more careful with how much debt we issue ourselves.
This is a topic that there's tremendous amount of mysticism about it, and you wouldn't believe how hard it was for me to write a Substack post about the role of the dollar, because I kept on wanting to stuff too many things into it, and I basically had my editor-in-chief, otherwise known as my wife, saying, no, that's too many charts and too many tables. Look, the dollar is very special. A lot of international commerce is conducted in dollars, even between countries, even trade between non-U.S. countries. A lot of international lending and borrowing is in dollars. And one of the things is the countries that want to hold a stockpile of foreign currency to be able to intervene in the markets in times of need. A lot of that, something like 60% of those stockpiles are held in dollars, and that's or dollar assets. So that's the dollar as reserve currency. The United States also attracts a lot of inflow of foreign capital, and we have a trade deficit as the counterpart of that. The balance of payments always balances. So the fact that we sell more assets than we buy has as its counterpart that we buy more goods than we sell. That's the sort of has to be. Arithmetic tells you that must be true. How much of that capital inflow is caused by the special role of the dollar? And the answer, most of us who do follow these things, is a little but not much. The idea that the trade deficit is sort of a one-to-one relationship with the dollar's role as reserve currency is much, much weaker. It's maybe a fraction of the story, but it's really not the main story. The main story is that America has been an attractive place to invest, and that's why we have a trade deficit.
Oh, okay. It sounds like he's saying maybe that isn't as important, I guess.
Foreign companies want to build plants in the United States. Foreign investors want to buy U.S. stocks, and that's the main reason that keeps the dollar strong and means that we have a trade deficit. But the idea that you can do a sort of magic fix, that you can somehow tell foreign countries to not stockpile so many dollars and that will reindustrialize America, is very appealing because I think it's partly that it feels important. I have quoted multiple occasions my old teacher Charles Kindleberger, who said anyone who spends too much time thinking about international money goes a bit mad. It sounds important, it sounds sophisticated, and it's also kind of antiseptic. If we could just have an international monetary conference and that will solve the problem of U.S. deindustrialization, that sounds a lot easier than having to muck around with industrial policy and all of that. So it's a very appealing prospect to a lot of people, but it's not realistic. We could undermine the dollar's role as a reserve currency. We may be doing that as we speak because of who wants to hold an unreliable, erratic country's currency as a reserve. But that's not going to solve any other major problems.
When I try to dive into MAGA world's thinking here, something that I tend to hear is a somewhat contradictory relationship or troubled relationship to American power. And so on the one hand, they want America to be stronger, more feared, more dominant. And on the other hand, there's a broad view that we have overextended ourselves. And on the one hand, financially, we've made the dollar the reserve currency. We've allowed all these other countries to, buy our assets and buy our money, even as our industrial base flowed out. And then on the military side, this idea that we have these bases all over the world. We have all these troops in Europe. We're part of NATO. We're spending more, as a percentage of GDP than some of these other countries. And that too is part of why we can no longer take care of our people. And so on the one hand, there's this feeling that, well, for America to be stronger, it can't be operating this global umbrella of financial and military protection. But then do you say, well, do you want the dollar to not be the reserve currency? And they say, no, we definitely want to keep it the reserve currency. Do you want America's military to be weaker? Do you want people to not, be tied to us in the way they are now? No, we actually want more leverage over them. There's something here that I think is very strange and very unresolved between this movement that wants both more dominance and somehow at the same time to pull back from the actual architecture of that dominance and leverage.
Yeah, I would say, America, the Pax Americana, we have been a kind of imperial power. Some people say more than a kind of. We've been an imperial power in many ways since the end of World War II. But it's a very strange. It's not like any previous empire. The Pax Americana starts with the Marshall Plan. Instead of plundering our defeated enemies, we rebuild them.
Krugman is a bit of a quack. He said in the 90s that the internet was going to be a fad. Take what he says with a grain of salt. Krugman, I'm pretty sure, is an incredibly well-respected economist. A ton of published work. A lot of people think a lot of what he says is credible. That particular article thing that you're talking about was explicitly, they were asked to try to make like the wackiest, craziest prediction you can about give us something big to publish about what was going on or something that could happen in the future. And the one that he gave was that, I think the internet will be no bigger than the fax machine. That was not some huge, massive prediction that he made that he was staking a whole bunch of economic or intellectual thought on. It was literally I don't know if it was a website or a magazine that was just publishing biggest predictions or whatever from economists. So the fact that you try to discredit anything he says about economics because of that is kind of goofy. But
and then we built a system of alliances, and we have NATO, we have the international economic institutions like the International Monetary Fund, which are all, they do actually kind of reflect U.S. interests, but at least on paper, we're at most first among equals. So we are a polite, low-key, relatively generous imperial power. That is a very hard role for many people to understand. It's sort of Greenland. Greenland. There are stories under which Greenland could become strategically important. It's a territory of Denmark, which is an ally under NATO. So we actually have the right and the ability to maintain military bases there. It doesn't have to be a U.S. territory. That's a little too hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around. They want us to be, they, on the one hand, don't want us to be spending resources supporting our allies. On the other hand, they want us to be exercising power, but they want something that's more direct. They want us to be a lot more like a traditional imperial power, which is foolish. I mean, the thing that we built, the thing that the the old U.S. establishment built after World War II with this soft imperial status, and was a pretty good one. We were able to build a world that was comfortable for us to live in without bloodshed, without a lot of the downsides of empire. But it is subtle, and subtle is not something that MAGA does.
I've wondered a bit if we're not going to see Republicans begin to grow a bit of spine here. So I was surprised to see Chuck Grassley and Maria Cantwell, Chuck Grassley being a Republican in the Senate, come out with a bill to restore congressional authority on tariffs. And then Mitch McConnell tweeted, "As I've always warned, tariffs are bad policy, and trade wars with our partners hurt working people most. Tariffs drive up the cost of goods and services. They are a tax on everyday working Americans. Preserving the long-term prosperity of the American industry and workers requires working with our allies, not against them." Now, that's not what we're hearing from most Republicans, but it seems to me like an early signal, particularly after Republicans lost that Supreme Court election in Wisconsin, that, as the economy suffers here, they may not be all that excited about standing by him.
Nobody
Well,
is.
the problem is that the thing about everybody you mentioned is they're all very old.
And they're on the way out
don't have much
anyway.
of a future political career just because they're very old. And anyone who, many people have over the years, over this past decade, kept on waiting for the Republican grown-ups to stand up against Donald Trump. And anybody who's made that bet has been very, very badly wrong again and again. So I don't think you should count on that. It seems to me much more likely that when, in the end, these guys will cave as they always have.
They'll cave, and Mike Johnson and John Thune control.
Well, I disagree with that analysis because something is different this time, and that's in the past, Trump would say crazy shit, and these guys hit on it in the beginning of the podcast. Republicans have never caved in the past because Donald Trump was always electorally popular. However, in the past, Donald Trump's ability to do unhinged, retarded shit was always a little bit inhibited, or majorly inhibited, by the bureaucracy, the deep state, people around him that actually knew what they were doing. This time, without those same inhibitions, it's conceivable that Donald Trump could cause so much chaos, or has, like with these tariffs, that people do start to turn against him because electorally it's just not a very good bet to stay next to him. But I guess we'll see.
The respective chambers, and if they break with Trump, that will be the end of their leadership.
Yeah. No, in both cases, it's hanging by thread. And look, we've seen this, that anyone who these past 90 years...
Oh my God, I just pushed the wrong button.
They, on the one hand, don't want us to be spending resources supporting our allies. On the other hand, they want us to be exercising power, but they want something that's...
If we're not going to see Republicans begin to grow goods and services, they are a tax on everyday working Americans. That's not what we tweeted, as I've always...
was comfortable for us to live in without bloodshed, without a lot of the downsides of empire, but it's...
Republican in the Senate come out with a bill to restore congressional authority on tariffs. And then Mitch McConnell tweeted, "Are a tax on everyday working Americans. Preserving the long-term prosperity of the American industry and workers requires working with our allies." Now, particularly after Republicans lost that Supreme Court fight in Wisconsin, all that excited about standing by him.
Well, the problem is that the thing about everybody you mentioned is they're all very old. Kept on waiting for the Republican to cave as they always have.
They'll cave, and Mike Johnson and John Thune control the respective chambers. And if they break with Trump, that will be the end of their leadership.
Yeah. No, in both cases, it's hanging by thread. And look, we've seen this, that anyone who Donald Trump certainly will retain until the end of his days, will retain the ability to destroy the career of any Republican who opposes him.
We've been talking here about the MAGA case against the sort of global trade regime. And I think it's pretty easy to pick it apart because the policies don't make sense and they're not going to work and the arguments are contradictory. And as you've said a couple times on your Substack, this is a case where Donald Trump has an intuition and all these people are coming behind him to try to apply theory to it. Yeah. But there has been a wider disillusionment with the global trade regime. Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor for Joe Biden, said that the postulate that deep trade liberalization would help America export goods, not jobs and capacity, was a promise made but not kept. Is there a version of the critique against the trading regimes we have, an argument for tariffs, maybe truly reciprocal tariffs, that you buy?
I don't really buy a tariff argument. And again, it's really important to understand that we have reciprocal tariffs. We have a free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico.
Yes.
Just it up.
If you're going to argue this, I hate that you even asked this fucking question, Ezra. Don't ever try to entertain or pretend that conservatives are making a point of these crazy things. You can negotiate all this stuff. I've said this a million times, and I think Krugman's about to say this now. You can negotiate all this stuff. It doesn't have to be with fucking tariffs. It's retarded.
That Donald Trump negotiated.
That Donald Trump negotiated. He took an existing agreement and changed a few semicolons, and they called it his agreement. But we have Europe has very low tariffs on our exports, just as we have very low tariffs on their exports as well. So we actually have a reciprocal trading regime. We do have persistent trade deficits, which are not, in a lot of ways, you could say that they're actually a reflection of U.S. strength. Money flows to the United States. Over the past 25 years, as the U.S. has had persistent large trade deficits, we've also had much faster productivity growth than other advanced countries. We've really pulled away from Europe in particular. We have better demography because we have somewhat higher fertility, but also immigration, which has meant that our economy has grown a lot faster. The U.S. has actually, we have basically maintained our share of world GDP despite the growth of China because we've grown so much faster than the rest of the advanced world. So if you just looked at the economic performance, we're doing fine. Now, there is a question of wages of ordinary workers have not grown as much as we'd like. We've had rising income inequality, and some of that is due to imports. And that actually is trade economics 101, that trade can have effects on income distribution. So yeah, there's something there, but the idea that it again comes down to this talking about globalization sounds like it's sophisticated, it's important, it's global. When I was much younger, my parents got me a sweatshirt that said Global Schmobile on it. And I asked why. They said, we were always going on to some conference, and when we ask you what it's about, you say Global Schmobile. So, Global Schmobile is a very appealing story. People like to talk about it. It's probably sort of well behind more mundane things like productivity growth and for that matter, labor policy in terms of causing inequality. But yeah, look, if I think I can tell this story.
I think you can too, whatever it is.
Yeah, I was I was visiting in Oxford back about 10 years ago, and it's extremely rude to step out of a dinner party in Oxford to take a phone call, unless the phone call is from the President of the United States complaining about the op-ed you just wrote. Because I came out against TPP, which Obama was advocating, and I just said I don't think this is a really good idea, and I think it's particularly you really shouldn't be spending political capital on this. And so a lot of us were feeling uneasy that the sort of uncritical pro-globalization argument had gone too far. So to say we need to step back, and we did. I mean, the Biden administration had some significant nationalistic economic policies, but it's a far cry between saying, we do need to think a little bit more about Buy America, and we need to think both national security and to some extent worker concerns. But there's a world of difference between that and what we're getting now.
I think that's a good place to end then. Always our final question is a veteran of the show. You know it. What are 3 books you'd recommend to the audience?
Okay, well, I just read. It's been out for a while, but I just read. I had a discussion with Zach Carter's The Price of Peace, which is about John Maynard Keynes and his role in the world, and then beyond. Fantastic book. My friend, fund manager Barry Rickholtz, has a great book called How Not to Invest, which, believe it or not, is interesting. Even if you aren't in investing, he's just really a lot of fun. I'm just reading the latest book by Phillips O'Brien, who's a military historian, and he has a new book called War and Power. And he is always fantastic, heterodox. He's pretty scathing, actually, about Biden administration policy. But anyway, it's a really interesting book.
Paul Krugman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wow. Futures down 4%. Based.